Were Achilles and Patroclus lovers? Is there any evidence for this? I didn't come across any in the Iliad. There didn't seem to be any in the Iliad itself. And although I know that homosexuality is said to have been a staple of ancient Greek life, whether or not we'd want to even call it homosexuality, were they lovers? And does it matter?
Did they or didn't they, right?
Yeah.
Talk about questions that have been debated since the composition of the Homeric poems. This question is particularly live in ancient scholarship because, sex is always interesting. Now, here are some things that we know. It's true, as you say, that there is no direct evidence in the Iliad for a sexual relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. Patroclus is the sort of closest friend and also kind of, in some senses, guardian and confidant.
He grew up with him, right? He grew up with Achilles.
That's right. That's right. And one thing that people forget is that Patroclus is older. Achilles is younger than Patroclus. He's not his kind of boy. That is one of the things that complicates the later debate, because essentially in classical antiquity, in 5th century BC Athens, we have a very storied record of homosexual practice between older men and younger boys. The kind of thing that we might actually react against on a number of levels, depending on our various sensibilities, one of which is age discrepancy. The term that's been used is pederasty, right? That you have a kind of older guiding man and a younger boy as a sort of initiative right, engaging in sexual practice. In that context, there is a kind of dance between what's licit and what's illicit. This is a widespread phenomenon. This is something that is normalized and in many instances spoken about quite openly, but there is also an impulse to kind of pretty it up and decorate it with more sort of elegant language, like saying that this is a purely intellectual relationship or something along those lines. But essentially, yes, I mean, it's complicated to even use our ideas about sexuality to talk about these relationships, because in the ancient world, it does seem like things were a little bit more fluid. On the other hand, there is a long and famous passage in Plato's Symposium, which is a dialogue all about love, in which the poet Aristophanes posits that there are people who sort of from birth are inclined to seek out one gender or another. Women who love women, women who love men, men who love men, and men who love women. All of this is by way of saying that we are looking at a culture in which homosexual contact and practice is a regular occurrence, in which it is an important feature of social life and, like all kind of matters of sex, a sort of vexed question. And this is the culture that's then looking back on the Iliad and interpreting for us and giving commentary. Within that culture and sort of thereafter, you have a lot of heated debate, especially over the question, to put it perfectly bluntly, of which one of them was on top, Achilles or Patroclus. This is, in Greek, you say the erastes, the active lover, and the eromenos, the beloved, the passive lover. And it's I would say probably more culturally important for the Greeks to determine which of those two things a man is than it is to make distinctions about heterosexual or homosexual practice. Basically, penetration is manly and acceptable, and being penetrated is sort of womanly and icky. I'm vastly oversimplifying here because, of course, every relationship has to have both people, so there are contexts in which an Athenian male might submit to being the eromenos.
You had this in samurai culture too, right?
I believe so. I don't know much about that. Is that the case?
Yeah, I took a Cultures of Pre-Modern Japan course, and the professor was pretty adamant about it. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, another feature of all this is military culture, right? And the idea that Spartan love, that you fight harder for a lover than you do for a friend. I mentioned earlier Alistair McIntyre, who mentions the fact that philia, which often gets translated as friendship, but is really sort of love, not necessarily romantic love based on a mutual goal or mutual interests. Philia is common and central to both friendships, male-male friendships, and also marriages. So there's philia between Odysseus and his wife Penelope. And so there's a real sense of kind of fluidity about the way that people think about these relationships, with the important caveat, of course, that male-female relationships produce children and therefore are culturally important in a whole number of other ways. The Greeks kind of argue around this. In some cases, Plato's Symposium includes an idea that pederastic relationships involve spiritual pregnancy, the production of ideas between man and man. But you still have the irreducible fact that, in order to create more of your society, the way that you do that is with this core relationship between man and a woman. But Achilles and Patroclus is a kind of interesting way into talking about a whole series of complicated questions about what was sexuality back then, what is it now, and does the Greek way of thinking about it in any way complicate our own way of thinking about it? Sir Kenneth Dover is kind of a central scholar on this subject. He wrote a long book on Greek homosexuality. But there's been a lot of, especially since it's such a trendy issue, there's been a lot of chit-chat about it recently as well.